Muchas gracias. This is Keith Callis with How to Build Your Own Home, and I want to unload on tiny homes from a builder's perspective. A lot of people have been researching on tiny homes, and I've been getting a lot of questions on tiny homes, and I want to give you some thoughts and insights that may help you understand um, some of the problems. And I want to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to tiny homes. It's a kind of a fad. It's a trend, and I think we need to kind of look at this a little more realistically. Here's the good. When it really gets down to tiny homes, there's basically one good that a lot of people are looking at. If it's not mobile, it's not good. That's basically the number one reason why people want a tiny home is they don't know where they're going to land. They don't know where they're going to plant their feet. And so most of the tiny homes you see out there, at least a lot of the ones you see built, they're built on a trailer with a double axle system so they can actually move the home from here to here. And if it's not mobile, it's not good. The only thing good about tiny homes, at least in the trend where it's, under 500 square feet, is that it should be mobile. That's the benefit. And if mobility is needed, and I'm going to ask a very serious question here. If you need to be mobile with your tiny home, why build it? Why not just buy a Silverstream RV trailer? When you're done with it after a year or two, it's going to maintain its value quite considerably more so than what you've built because it can withstand the elements. Research Silverstream RV trailers. They're some of the best. Um, they're made of aluminum. They last a long time. And they've been building what is quote unquote tiny homes for decades. Their layout is phenomenal. Their usability, utility are designed for that under 500 square feet, 400 square feet, even down to 300 square feet of livable space. And I think that a lot of people go into the tiny home um, trend thinking they are going to build something completely unique and really, really affordable. But they're not. And I'm going to go through a lot of other issues with regard to tiny homes. Again, if you're building a tiny home and you want it mobile, don't build it. Just go buy a trailer or an RV and live in it if you need to be mobile. Almost enough said on that. I've seen so many tiny homes that are on a trailer, and they've wasted an enormous amount of money, and I'm going to explain why. And now I want to get into the bad and the ugly. The good, of course, is that they're mobile, and if they're mobile, it means that you're not quite ready to plant your feet down. You don't know where you're going to be or what have you, and that's the real secret to tiny homes is mobility. Typically, a tiny home is around 100 to 400 square feet. That's basically a definition that pulled from a different source, several sources, that is between 100 and 400 square feet, not much bigger than a hotel room. So if you've been into, say, a Marriott or some other newer hotel, that's about 400 square feet. That's about the size of a tiny home on its max level. Now keep in mind, tiny homes are much different than small homes. I'm going to talk about that in a second. A tiny home is really under 400 square feet. Sometimes they'll go a little higher, but mostly it's 400 square feet and down. Well, beyond that size, beyond that 400 square feet, we're getting into an entirely different concept, and it's really it's a small home. It's a single family home, and we're going to talk about that in just a second here. Many tiny homes are temporary, and I think that that's a good utility for people making a transition. I know a lot of people who build a tiny home because they're going to go to school and they've got a grandpa or someone that they can park a trailer on and build a tiny home and live in that for 2 or 3 years and save on some rent. But again, why not just get a Silverstream? Why not get something that's going to maintain its value and not waste all that money into a tiny home, which requires a lot of maintenance? And a lot of times people build tiny homes on trailers and they're too heavy, and they don't realize the weight they're putting on that double axle, and it's very inefficient as far as towing it. Super, super heavy. Uh, the other thing to consider is that many tiny homes, because they're temporary, they're built without proper energy conservation. The utility costs on tiny homes, whether it's a 2x2, 2x3, or even a 2x4 construction, they're poorly insulated. They don't insulate very well. And so if you're in the northern climates and you're going to go through some cold spells in the winter, they're extremely drafty and cold in the winter. I just had a good friend message me, and she and her husband are moved into a tiny home. She's an author and writer, and they're heading up to Wisconsin. And I wish them well. This is going to be very cold. Something to consider down the road is that we are going into what's called the grand solar minimum. It's the waxing and waning of the sun, and the sun is going through its quiet cycle right now for the next 15 to 30 years. And that means we're going into a colder dip, not a hotter rise in temperatures. The sun has its cycles, and farmers know this, and really, really good builders know this. And right now, the smart builders are building for the highest energy efficiency you can imagine if they're in sync with this technology and if they're in sync with the weather and where cycles are going. Uh, and so that's something to consider. Tiny homes in northern climates, if they're not properly insulated, you're going to find yourself very, very, very uncomfortable. And again, tiny homes, they just don't think for the future. If you have a growing family, uh, tiny homes cannot accommodate that, especially if they're 400 square feet and above. You may have a loft up above and whatnot, and think that's efficient and what have you, but it's not. One of the things that I found very effective in building, especially in colder climates, and as the climate starts to get colder, is being able to have a potbelly stove in there, a Franklin stove, where you've got miscellaneous lumber that you can heat up without tapping into a utility cost. Well, tiny homes, if you're not built right, you need a lot of clearance around that flue and a lot of clearance from the wall and a lot of insulation between the wall and the potbelly stove. And the potbelly stove has got to be on a hard surface, maybe some concrete or some brick, again, because it gets so hot. And that requires a lot of space around that for clearance, for protection. And a lot of people build tiny homes, again, without knowing code, without knowing the safety requirements, without knowing conservation and insulation requirements, to really make it highly efficient. They just say, look, we built this for $400, and it's really not livable. It's very inefficient as far as living conditions are concerned. Um, here's some ugly stuff that, and it's really economics, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I really, really want to talk honestly when it comes to tiny homes. A tiny home is typically not real estate. If it's not on a permanent foundation, it's not real estate. And so you're not building equity. You've just got something on wheels that's hard to maintain. And think about the chassis. Think about everything underneath that tiny home. All the cold weather coming up through the floorboards. It's just very inefficient. So they're not considered real estate, and they're poorly built. The floorboard and the insulation factor is almost non-existent with tiny homes. And so if it's not real estate, you're not building equity in the home. And to me, as a builder, I'm always trying to build equity in homes. I'm always trying to make sure that you are positive in the valuation of your property. One thing I try to do as a builder is I always try to maximize my square feet, maximize my space utility, maximize the value of the home, so that when I'm done building the home, there's positive equity at the end of that build, especially in a relatively good market. But if you build smart, you should be able to have positive equity at the end. And tiny homes don't have any equity other than hopefully being able to sell it down the road. And again, they're often done without permitting, and because it's not permitted, it's not a permanent foundation. Because it's not a permanent foundation, it's not considered real estate. I'm going to talk in next week's post, just as a kind of a forecast of what's going to come. I'm going to give the three best alternatives to tiny homes, and I want to blow your mind. And these are ideas that have been used by many cultures, many people throughout Europe, throughout the United States, South America, you name it, for hundreds of years. And I'm going to tell you some of the three best ways you can enter into home ownership on an extremely affordable level. The only difference is they won't be mobile. If you need to be mobile, buy a trailer. Don't waste your money, and don't build a tiny home. Utilize the experts who have been building tiny homes, and those are the RV people. And look at that. Do a cost comparison analysis between an RV, an actual trailer that you buy, a well-built one, and a tiny home. And at the end of it, you can sell that RV, especially if you keep it up. Versus the tiny home, it's all going to be probably trashed. You may not be able to utilize that. So why do tiny homes cost so much? Because they are built by people who ignore lasting quality and efficiency. Tiny homes are a trend with less utility and less value than nomadic cultures like the Native American Indians. They mastered tiny homes. They had a tent, and they had more square footage than a tiny home. They had a fire in the middle, and they had a natural flue for the smoke to go right up through the top. If you want square footage and something that's mobile, super, super cheap, think about a tent. In fact, some of our camping gear out there, tents, are better designed for tiny home living. And they're right on the ground floor. You can put bales of hay right down on the bottom, and you can stack a bale of hay all the way around that tent. You've got some good insulation factor, at least better than what most tiny homes have, to survive. I mean, I can camp out and survive on hardly nothing in a better fashion than if I were to build a tiny home that's out in the open and is facing all of the elements. Just because you can build a 340 square foot Craftsman tiny home on a flatbed trailer with four wheels does not make you smart. It makes you creative, but doesn't make you smart. Take a moment and compare tiny homes, and I want you to shift your mind here for just a little bit, from a great resource that I found is rosschapman.com. That's ROSSCHAPIN.com. He's an architect in, I believe, Oregon, and I've been fascinated with his work. And he designs small homes. He doesn't design tiny homes that are 400 and below. He designs small homes that are roughly 600 square feet to about 1,400 square feet. And they're incredibly well designed. And he also builds tiny home communities, or small homes, what I call cottage communities, that are a lot more affordable living. This is kind of like a precursor to what I'm going to talk about next week. But I want you to imagine more permanent structures. And if you're going to build something, make it a permanent structure. And you're going to have equity. You're going to have a proper valuation. You're going to have better insulation, better utilities. I'm going to be talking a lot more down the road of better technologies out there that can actually save you on your utilities. In fact, you can actually build without having almost no utility. You can. It takes a lot of planning, a lot of thought and consideration. But if you're smart, you can. We build today too often in a way that we don't consider utility costs. I've seen homes that are 3,000-4,000 square feet, and the utility costs can be $400, $500, $600. And I look at that and I scratch my head and I says, what if we can shave $200 off of that a month? That's a huge savings. $300 a month. What if we could shave that? But people buy homes and they don't consider utility costs, and they build tiny homes and they don't consider utility costs. The real cost to heat that, they just plug it into mom and dad's plug in the backyard, and they drain mom and dad or grandpa and grandma from energy costs and not realize what the waste is or where the waste in energy is going. So, how do you build a tiny home cheap and fast? The answer is you can't. If affordability is what people are looking for in building smaller, there are some better solutions, and we're going to talk about that in that next post. I don't want to take up time in this post. I just wanted you to be realistic about the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to tiny homes. The next post I have to look forward to is 3 better ideas than tiny homes. It will come after this post. We'll do it next week. 3 better ideas than tiny homes. And I even have more ideas than that, but I really want to focus on 3 ways you can build that are much better than a tiny homes. Okay. In that post to follow, I will give 3 superior alternatives to tiny homes that we are not considering in the marketplace anyway. In fact, when I talk about these, I'm hoping to start a better trend on affordability in housing. I've been doing low-income housing for years. I've won awards with affordable housing. There are ways to get square footage. There are ways to build more affordably and more efficiently. Owner builders out there, you're going to love that post. Make sure you subscribe, follow. It's going to be a fun one. When it gets down to it, just think realistically about tiny homes. I hate to rag on an entire trend that's going on out there, but I look at real cost, I look at real valuation, I look at equity in a project, I look at the possibility of a resale, I look at so many different factors, and I think that when it comes to tiny homes, we're not thinking straight. We're not looking at the elements, we're not looking at changing weather dynamics, we're not looking at a lot of things to consider when it comes to tiny homes. And there are better alternatives than to go and waste your time and money building something on a double axle. If you look around, you'll find if I were to build something and I needed it to be mobile, I'd go find an old Silverstream or an all old trailer and I would rehab that. That's what I would do. If I needed to be mobile and I needed to be on a double axle and I needed to make it a super affordable, I'd just rehab that and keep it super, super simple. I wouldn't try to build a whole new craftsman home that's a tiny home. Let's see. Cost per square foot. I had a viewer that asked the cost per square foot. Tiny homes more than likely will be much higher in the cost per square foot than you could ever imagine. The big issue is can you resell that cost per square foot? I'm going to talk about cost per square foot on the next post and how you can get your square footage. If you try to live in 400 square feet for longer than 6 months and it's 2 of you in the same room, it's really going to get crowded fast, real fast. And if you look at people that have tiny homes, just research it. They've got a lot of stuff outside. A lot of their stuff is in storage. And people naturally have a need for elbow room. They have a natural need to plant something, to create an opportunity. You can't have guests over. And they want to be part of a community. And tiny homes that are 400 square feet, they're not inviting to the community. They don't have an open door to let the community come in, because when you walk in, there's no room. There's very little room. Now, I'm sorry if I'm dishing on tiny homes. I know people have created some interesting designs and whatnot for some real simplistic living, and I know that kind of creativity is out there. But by and large, I've been seeing a lot of problems with it. And there are some good and some bad and some ugly. And you need to look at all 3 of those. Consider that. This is Keith Kelch with How to Build Your Own Home. Again, tune in for next week's post. I'm going to talk about 3 alternatives and some of the best ways you can actually build in an affordable way and start off small, keep your costs down, and really build valuation for the future. See you next time. This is Keith Kelch again with How to Build Your Own Home.